I'm going to jump around a lot this week. Is that too dark? Do you want me to turn it back up? That's fine. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to jump around quite a lot for this. Basically, for this week, as I said at the start, this week and next week are like the two most crucial pieces of content in the whole course, which is basically what's Lean Startup and the business model canvas. So what I'm trying to do, which might be slightly ridiculous, but I'm trying to condense like 5 books into 2 lectures. So there's a lot of like associated material. If you need to know something, there's usually like hours and hours of videos or supporting articles and material that you could go and explore on those individual bits. So have any of you done the readings for this week already? Yeah? Okay, you have. Cool, because some students are like, they like sit behind 1 week. Cool, so you guys have already read the Lean Startup stuff, yeah? Yeah, cool. All right, in that case, this will be a lot more interesting, and you guys, I think, will be able to engage with it in a different way. Did you find it interesting? Like, based on what you're thinking about for your startup ideas, did you find it relevant? Was it stupid? Was it hard to contextualize it? Like,
I think so. Some sentences was very useful.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's good. All right, we can talk about that. So, what I want to go over, and this will be good because if you've all read it, then we'll actually be able to sort of force some of these concepts into your ideas, like as we go, as opposed to doing it all at the end. So I want to go through basically my summary of what the Lean Startup actually is, talk a little about what leap of faith assumptions are, go through minimum viable products, and then the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Now those are 3 really big concepts that we're covering. So actually, I'm going to cover a chunk of them this week, and then we'll revisit a chunk of them next week as well. And so I'll also give you some examples of stuff that I've done in the context of media, and then we can talk about other examples that are out there. So let's watch this. Oops. Which is a nice little summary, just to rehash.
Stop if you've heard this one before. Brilliant college kids are inventing the future. Heedless of boundaries and possessing new technology, they build a new company from scratch. Their early success allows them to raise money and bring an amazing new product to market. They hire their friends, assemble a superstar team, and dare the world to stop them. 10 years and several startups ago, that was me, building my first company. I particularly remember a moment from back then, the moment I realized my company was going to fail. My co-founder and I were at our wits' end. The dot-com bubble had burst, and we'd spent all our money. We tried desperately to raise more capital, but we couldn't. We were arguing in the street, and we couldn't even agree on where to walk next. So we parted in anger, headed in opposite directions. The company limped along for months afterward, but our situation was hopeless. At the time, it seemed we were doing everything right. We had a great product, a brilliant team, amazing technology, and the right idea at the right time. And we really were onto something. We were building a way for college kids to create online profiles for the purpose of sharing with employers. Oops. But despite a promising idea, we were nonetheless doomed from day one because we didn't know the process we would need to use to turn our product insights into a great company. If you've never experienced a failure like this, it's hard to describe the feeling. It's as if the world were falling out from under you. Hard work and perseverance don't lead to success. Even worse, the many promises you've made to employees, friends, and family are not going to come true. Everyone who thought you were foolish for stepping out on your own will be proven right. It wasn't supposed to turn out that way. In magazines and blogs, we hear the mantra of the successful entrepreneurs. Through determination, brilliance, great timing, and above all, a great product, you too can achieve fame and fortune. But I've come to believe that story is false, the product of selection bias and after-the-fact rationalization. In fact, having worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, I've seen firsthand how often a promising start leads to failure. The grim reality is that most startups fail. Most new products aren't successful. Most new ventures don't live up to their potential. Yet the story of perseverance, creative genius, and hard work persists. I think rags to riches story. It makes success seem inevitable if you just have the right stuff. It means that the mundane details, the boring stuff, the small individual choices don't matter. If we build it, they will come. When we fail, as so many of us do, we have a ready-made excuse. We didn't have the right stuff. We weren't visionary enough, or we weren't in the right place at the right time. After 10 years as an entrepreneur, I came to reject that line of thinking. I've learned from both my successes and failures that it's the boring stuff that matters the most. Startup success isn't a consequence of good genes or being in the right place at the right time. Startup success can be engineered by following the right process, which means it can be learned, which means it can be taught. Entrepreneurship is a kind of management. We have wildly divergent associations with these two words, entrepreneurship and management. Lately, it seems that one is cool, innovative, and exciting, and the other is dull, serious, and bland. It's time to look past these preconceptions. Let me tell you another story. In 2004, and a group of founders have just started a new company. Their previous company had failed very publicly. Their credibility is at an all-time low. They have a huge vision to change the way people communicate by using a new technology called avatars. The engineering challenge before them is immense. I'm in this second story too. I'm a co-founder of this company, which is called IMVU. At this point in our careers, my co-founders and I are determined to make new mistakes. We do everything wrong. Instead of spending years perfecting our technology, we build a minimum viable product, an early product that is terrible, full of bugs. Then we ship it to customers way before it's ready, and we charge money for it. We change the product constantly, much too fast by traditional standards, shipping new versions of our product dozens of times every single day. We really did have customers in those early days, true visionary early adopters, and we often talked to them and asked for their feedback. But we didn't do what they said. We viewed their input as only one source of information about our product and overall vision. In fact, we were much more likely to run experiments on our customers than to cater to their whims. Traditional business thinking says this approach shouldn't work, but it does, and you don't have to take my word for it. As you'll see, the approach we pioneered at IMVU has become the basis for a new movement of entrepreneurs around the world. It builds on many previous management and product development ideas, including lean manufacturing, design thinking, customer development, and agile development. It represents a new approach to creating continuous innovation. It's called the Lean Startup. There are 5 principles to the Lean Startup. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. You don't have to work in a garage to be in a startup. The concept of entrepreneurship includes anyone who works within my definition of a startup, a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That means entrepreneurs are everywhere, and the Lean Startup approach can work in any size company, even a very large enterprise in any sector or industry. Entrepreneurship is management. A startup is an institution, not just a product, and so it requires a new kind of management specifically geared to its context of extreme uncertainty. It's managed through a unit of progress called validated learning. Startups exist not just to make stuff, make money, or even serve customers. They exist to learn how to build a sustainable business. This learning can be validated scientifically by running frequent experiments that allow entrepreneurs to test each element of their vision. We do this by running through the build, measure, learn feedback loop. The fundamental activity of a startup is to turn ideas into products, measure how customers respond, and then learn whether to pivot or persevere. All successful startup processes should be geared to accelerate that feedback loop. This measurement is called innovation accounting. To improve entrepreneurial outcomes and hold innovators accountable, we need to focus on the boring stuff, how to measure progress, how to set up milestones, and how to prioritize work. This requires a new kind of accounting designed for startups. It may seem counterintuitive to think that something as disruptive, innovative, and chaotic as a startup can be managed, or to be accurate, must be managed. Most people think of process and management as boring and dull, whereas startups are dynamic and exciting. But what is actually exciting is to see startups succeed and change the world. The passion, energy, and vision that people bring to these new ventures are resources too precious to waste. We can and must do better. This book is about how.
Cool. All right, cool. So why is this important? So you guys remember this from week 1? I talked about this. Maybe. Existing business models are in the left-hand corner, and new and disruptive left-hand bottom corner. And new and disruptive business models are in the right-hand corner on the top. And Steve Blank, Eric Ries, all these guys say that that's actually a search for a new business model. So you're actually hunting for something, you're looking for something. And the most effective way to do that is with some sort of scientific method that validates your learning. So, you know, at the start, what I was saying, well, towards your business ideas or your startup ideas, the best measure will be traction. And traction is actually just how much validated learning have you made towards realizing that goal. You know, how have you validated that your idea is good based on what people are willing to pay for it? Have you validated your idea on whether you can actually take that product to market, etc., etc. So that's what traction and validation actually is. I'll talk a little bit about that more when we start getting into sort of talking about a business and then trying to talk to investors and all of that sort of stuff. But that's why it's important, because he defines it, and this is Steve Blank, who was in that video. So he was actually the guy who wrote the Lean Startup book. I think Steve Blank was one of his mentors. He was an entrepreneurship professor at Stanford University. And this is how he defines it. A startup is a search for a business model. So my quick sort of 5-slide summary of what the Lean Startup is that you set the vision for your startup, and the vision doesn't or shouldn't change. So all of the process of actually the Lean Startup, the process is basically trying to realize your vision. But your vision shouldn't really change. So you set that vision and then you define, all right, underneath that vision, so whatever it is I'm trying to do, what are your leap of faith assumptions, what he calls the assumptions that are inherent to that business model, to try and make it work. And they come in two forms: value, leap of faith or hypothesis, and growth hypotheses. And I'll talk about those in detail in a second. The next step is basically you build something, and you build a test, but that comes in the form of a product, something that people actually can get their hands on and either pay for, read, buy, something real, as opposed to something intangible where people say, oh yeah, that looks cool, you know, I might buy that, and they never do. So it has to be real, and you use that product, the MVP, the minimum viable product, to test your assumptions. And that you could build. There are examples in the textbook of guys who've built like 20 MVPs in different categories, all to try and solve, like, all different, trying to test the assumptions of a totally like an actual business model that they're trying to prove. So it's not like some people build MVPs that actually turn out to be the final product. So it's almost like a linear. They build it, they change it, they learn something, they build it again, they change it. Some people, they build like lots of different ones. The next step is once you've built it, got it in the hands of people who may or may not love it, you validate or disprove those assumptions that you put together, the value assumptions or the growth assumptions. And really this is sort of, if you really boil it down, it's actually really basic. It's sort of like year 10 science. It's super simple. Basically, you've got a hypothesis, you do an experiment, and you prove or disprove whether that is true or not. But you do that over and over and over again. And then the final step is to pivot or persevere in the search for your sustainable business model. So we'll talk about pivots, I think, a fair bit more next week. It's not really that, I'm not going to talk about it too much this week, but the final step there is basically say, well, what do we have wrong and what do we have right? And is our vision and our business salvageable, or does it need to change? Or, and that's in the context of the value proposition, and I'll talk about that now. Or it could be, hey, this business idea is okay, but we ran this test and it turns out that the people that we wanted to sell it to, they don't like it, but these other people over here, they really like it. So let's pivot towards those people, a different customer segment. Cool. Any questions on those? You guys never have questions. I should stop asking. All right, so what's a leap of faith assumption? I'll just check my time. Yeah, we've got time for this.
Well, let's talk about that piece of the entrepreneurial approach. Taking your vision for this grand success that'll change the world how do you coach people on how to then extract from that, subdivide that, decompose that into the hypotheses to test?
It's a skill that has to be learned over time. So the first thing is to have compassion on yourself as an entrepreneur, that this is going to take a while to get the hang of, because we believe so much in the vision. It's hard to really imagine making it small. And I usually tell people the rule of thumb is think about the smallest thing you could possibly build and then cut it in half again, and think about launching that. Because the great thing about being an obscure entrepreneur, no one knows who you are, is there's no penalty for launching too soon. As long as you're not doing press releases and trying to get big fast, if you just put the product in front of customers and they don't like it, and they don't like it in the way that you don't like it, that's actually great news. That means you're on the right track. You can apologize to them that it's not ready, and you'll have customers to go back to. But the truth is, in almost every time I've launched a first version of a product, it's not that people tried it and didn't like it. It's that they didn't even care enough to try it. And so it didn't matter how many features it had and how elaborate it was. So the process of breaking down a vision into a series of hypotheses is about recognizing that our brilliant business plan, with all the full financials and predictions about the future, that's nothing more than a series of assumptions, statements about how the world works that can be tested. And so what we want to do is kind of take each of those inputs out of that spreadsheet, like the box that says 10% of customers will sign up for the free trial, and say, is there a way we could test just that one number right now? If we're planning, once the product is done, to sell it online, well, could we offer it for pre-order online today, even though we don't have it? And then if we should be so lucky as to have to apologize to those people who try to buy that it's not available, well, that would help us figure out what is that sign-up rate for the trial right now. And even if we get bad news, much better to have bad news that's true than the good news that we made up and put in our business plan.
So you have a name for it, leap of faith assumptions.
Yeah.
How do you know which are the leap of faith assumptions and which to test first?
It's a concept that is explored in a book called Getting to Plan B. And leap of faith assumptions are those kind of key ideas upon which the whole business depends. And they tend to be the really basic things about, A, will customers find our product valuable? Will they be willing to pay for it? Will they be willing to use it and repeat use it as necessary? And will we be able to grow our business in some way? Can we get customers to refer other customers? Will that be advertising for us? Those tend to be the core things. And the way you know them technically is if you look at your brilliant Excel model, spreadsheet of how all the different bits, if you take one of those inputs and change it to 0, if it makes all the other numbers go to 0, that's a pretty good indicator that it's a leap of faith assumption. The trick is not all assumptions are created equal. And some of them are actually really unremarkable, that are just, based on standard industry practice. So a classic thing is a business like Facebook that plans to make its money through advertising. You don't have to ask, if I had the time and attention of 100 million people, could I resell that attention to advertisers? That's pretty well understood. The far riskier thing is, will there be a way for me to get all that attention for free through viral growth? So it's a matter of kind of thinking about which assumptions, do we have pretty good proxies for already? Is it pretty much understood how they work? And which of them truly is a change in customer behavior from the status quo?
Cool. So that's a leap of faith assumption. At the moment, your whole idea is an assumption, though, because you haven't tested any of it. So everything in the ideas that we were discussing last week. He has a really good YouTube channel. I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested. Eric Ries. Yeah, so your whole idea is an assumption, right? Because none of it's proven or none of it's tested. But as he was saying, there are two things to consider in that. Some things you don't need to test because they are inherent to the markets you might be entering. Like for your idea, for example, Chinese students want to come and study in Australia and the US. You don't have to test that for your business idea. You know that. For yours, like scientific reporting is actually, if you're still going to go with that, you may not be, but scientific reporting is a viable category of content. People are interested in that. You look at I fucking love science and all these other things. Like people are actually interested in it. There might be things wrong with the coverage, but that's not something you have to test. Exactly the same with your content category. The anime things that you were discussing last week. but there are things inherent to those that you will have to test because the thing you're going to do should be slightly different. So, for example, the value hypothesis, proposition hypothesis. Now, a value proposition is basically, does what you do really deliver value to the customer? And value in this context is more based around the economics definition rather than sort of a hard business transaction, because particularly in this sphere of journalism, there's a lot more to journalism than just what people are willing to pay. There's a lot more value inherent to that than that doesn't relate to economic output. Another example is if you're a social entrepreneur, then what you're actually doing needs to provide value, but in a different way to a typical hardcore for-profit business. But it's actually just, and Steve Blank uses this summary of, does the product actually do what it says on the packet and deliver delight to an end user or an end customer? So in the context of Facebook, he uses this example in the book, which I think is pretty good. The Facebook as it was called back then, their actual indication that they were onto a strong value proposition was the fact that people, once they were signed up in these tiny little schools like Harvard and wherever, there was like 4 or 5 of them right at the start, they were using it for like half an hour at a time, which is unheard of back then. It was unheard of in sort of the digital sphere. Like you would spend that much time on one website. It managed to capture 3/4 or something crazy of all of the students at Harvard. So it had this huge kind of inherent attraction factor to it. So people were spending a lot of time there. So that's sort of like a big tick, right? Yeah, this is pretty valuable. People find it pretty valuable. The next side is the growth hypothesis. So actually what this is, you are inherent to your idea, there are assumptions around how a customer will discover your product. So that's how you take it to market, how people will buy it. Do you need intermediaries to sell it for you? Do you need approval from certain bodies to sell into certain categories? So for example, your business idea, you're going to have to work pretty hard to get whatever you do approved by the Department of Education in Australia as well. Those are growth hypotheses. You might have a ripping value proposition. You might have the most valuable product in the world, but people only want to use it when it's free, for example. Or it might be amazing, but it's impossible to deliver to a customer. So in the context of Facebook, actually their growth hypothesis, the primary one, was the fact that they were acquiring customers with little to no marketing investment. Because it had this, what he described in that video, it had this what's called a viral coefficient. It was growing because people were loving it and sharing it. And that meant that they could acquire over 1 billion users without really having to spend serious marketing money. Which is, as you said at the start, like if you've got 100 million people on a website, say if you had 100 million people on a news website you ran, you could probably make money off that. You would be the worst business person on earth if you couldn't make some advertising money off that. The real question is actually, can you get there? Lots of startups, they nail a value proposition, but then they fall down on the right-hand side where, all right, yeah, you might have something that's valuable, like news websites are a great example, content websites. You might have something that people want to read, but it's not really scalable in the terms of growth. You have to buy customers at a rate that's too expensive. That means that the investment you have to put in that will never pay off. And then, so a classic example would be the pictures beneath here, like a musician, their output is actually, their value proposition, the actual product that they produce on the left-hand side, and then actual way people consume and discover that product has changed pretty dramatically with streaming services, for example. And that's something a dynamic in that market that's shifted pretty dramatically. So here's mine. So I've made a little logo for my startup for the semester, Newsblock. From week 1, I said I was going to pursue this idea. So my elevator pitch is the Newsblock is a peer-to-peer transactional network designed to reward the creation and distribution of quality journalism. I should say financially reward. The problem is the economic model of journalism is broken down with the distributed media ecosystem. People are consuming content in lots of different places, but content is consumed on those platforms, but the creators typically only are able to make money on the one platform that they actually own, which is typically a website, so a media website. And that presents a really big problem, because if you can only sell advertising on your website, but most of the time people are reading your news on Facebook, then you can't make money. So my solution is to allow creators to freely distribute content anywhere, but to earn money through a combination of blockchain and Bitcoin technology. Now, what are my leap of faith assumptions in there? What do you guys think? What are some big glaring assumptions that you can see?
Is that blockchain, does that exist yet?
That's probably a big one. Can that technology actually do that for me? Any other ones? If you think back to last week, one of the slides in last week's presentation was propensity to pay for news. Do you guys remember what that figure was?
Low.
It's like 10% or something like that. So one of the biggest assumptions in here is I'm building a network that assumes people will pay for news. Now, some people will. Yeah, are there enough? Could I structure it in such a way that it was easier to do, potentially? Anything else?
Are there problems with, I don't know, if something ends up on Facebook, how do you implement the technology on Facebook and have it on all these sites where people are posting content?
Yeah, definitely. So how will I engage the channel partners in this business model to actually make it a reality? Because inherent to that is the fact that those people will have to get on board if this is going to work. You know, the big networks, Facebook, every other social network, all that sort of stuff. I won't dwell on this because obviously it's not as relevant because it's not one of your ideas, but that's sort of just an example where you can see. So I'll talk briefly about Fans Unite and why this is relevant. So this is a site that I launched 2014. Didn't look like this. It looked like it had a different design back then. And we relaunched this design in 2015. And it's a blogging network focused on sport. And we had a range of different leap of faith assumptions inherent to this startup. So I'll show you some that we actually then reported back to our board on. So we actually said, look, these are the things we don't know in this business model, but every month, we're going to come back to you with what we've learned against all of those different assumptions. So this is a board paper, an example of a board paper that we were presenting every month. And we actually did it across five distinct value proposition assumptions. So if you imagine, do you guys know what I mean by a blogging network? If you're familiar with something like Tumblr, have you guys heard of that? Yeah, that's a blogging network. Anyone can sign up, they get a little domain of their own, and they can write about whatever they want. We were basically saying we want to just do that, but only for sport. And then we put in some, professional journos. We've got some high quality content from AAP. We bought images from Getty Images to make it look pretty professional. So that actually you could just blog, but then you'd have like the latest game highlights and a bunch of other stuff to try and build a bit of value. So it was a lower cost content model. And then every month, so we had a board. We were called Citizen Media Group back then. We had a board and said, all right, well, see at the top there, a critical assumption number one. Inherent to this is that we need a critical mass of active bloggers, because a blogging network doesn't work unless lots of people are in there writing. So our first assumption, and these are incremental, like you can't have the next one without the one before it. You can't have an audience without content. and we couldn't have content without bloggers, so we had to start there. So we had success metrics that we talked to the board about, and we were like, all right, we want 80 active bloggers by May 2015, and the growth rate needs to be between 2 to 5% every month. And then we needed them to be producing an average of 11 posts or articles per month. So that was our target. So we needed a number, and then needed to be punching out a bunch of content. And then we said, well, in January, we had 15. And those are pretty low numbers. But that's okay, as long as you're measuring them and you know what's wrong and you know how to fix it. And the growth rate at that point was through the floor, because we hadn't actually started recruitment, and they were producing an average of 2.9. So that's a pretty glaring warning sign. You say, all right, well, unless you fix that, this whole website's going to collapse. So we said, all right, well, what are we doing? We started recruiting. We did a bunch of stuff through Twitter. We had an EDM campaign. We were launching a payment model that was around performance. So, we were going to pay them if they produced a certain amount of articles per month, and then we paid them on performance. Bunch of different stuff that we tried, lots of tests all the way through there. So that was the first assumption. The next one is user engagement. So we're saying, well, we have content, but if that content isn't getting people to read it, then we still don't have a business. So the next critical assumption was, can we make people stay on the site? And so our target by May, we wanted people to stay on the site for 2 minutes or more. We wanted them to have 4 sessions per unique browser, UB, and at least 5 page views per session. Wanted to look at 5 different pages every time they came, and we wanted them to come to the site 4 times a month. And if we did that, we thought, all right, we reckon we can, that's us building an audience. And then we were taking action specifically underneath those as well. So it's a pretty methodical, and it's good for investors, or good for people, good for anyone really, even your employees or people working with you, other journos. You can basically say, look, this is what we know we need to do, and this is what we're doing every month to try and solve that. And if you're doing something else, you're wasting your time, because we know that this is where we want to go. And unless you're actually actively working towards proving or disproving your critical assumptions, you're basically just lighting money on fire every month and not really trying to validate any learning that's meaningful for your business model. The next one was target monthly unique users. Yeah, so after engagement, we said we wanted to, have a certain number of, millions of users on the site after a certain amount of time. The next one was cost of acquisition. So there was a cost that we were actually acquiring users through paid content-led campaigns, and we had a target for that, and that was a portion of our organic growth. When there was paid growth, there was organic growth and paid growth. And our target metric on that was we wanted to pay 12 cents per user coming in, and that was typically through Facebook advertising, which was very easy to do. It's very easy to do in the context of media, because people want to read it. So it's sort of a bit of a strange thing to put money behind. Ideally, you would not want to do any of that. You would never want to pay to acquire users from your content. Your content should be interesting enough that people just come to you. But we're in sport, which is a hyper competitive market. So, or like your idea, Yale, is more commercial. So actually, you can afford to pay to acquire people via content because it's more of a marketing cost. Whereas if you're a media startup, your product actually is your content. So it's a different mindset. And then the next one was sales. So I won't go into that because otherwise we'll be chatting about that for ages. Where's my... Yes, there we go. It's not as relevant for today. The next thing I'll show you was actually, which is relevant to this conversation, is when I was starting that, I had to build an MVP. So it's a blogging network, as I said, and behind every one of these, I'll actually show you online because it looks much better online. There we go. So you can see there's like a leaderboard and all the popular writers. Still still trying to get the community going because that guy's actually, or was actually a paid writer. And there's content from AAP, but you can see there's all these different blogs here. So there's about 1,000 blogs in this network now. But right back then, when we were starting, I was like, well, what's the minimum unit that I need to test for this network? And I said, well, it's a blogging network. Inherently, it's a blogging network. So the thing I need to test is a blog. So I quickly spun up this blog on WordPress. It looks terrible, I know. The specific intent of testing a couple of those different assumptions. A, could I acquire users at a certain cost? And were they interested in generic content from what I would call sort of pro-amateur commentators, sports commentators? Pardon me. So we spun this up and we tested a bunch of assumptions, and I might distribute some of the information from this test in the Slack channel for you guys to read. Cool. So that's a quick spin through of the Lean Startup, that sort of section of the Lean Startup. It's important that I talk about the business model canvas in the context of this. So the reason why the business model canvas is important is because, I'll go to this now. We can talk about this in a second after we watch the summary, but like this center piece of value proposition is where initially a lot of your effort will go, because that's actually your product, right? What's your value proposition? And so a lot of your tests will actually be focused on testing and disproving your value proposition. But it doesn't actually stop there. As you start filling in, this is like a business plan, as you fill in the rest of it, you'll still keep going through that process, like what assumptions are in this part of my business model? What do I need to test? Across everything. So it's not just, your idea. It's not one big test. It's lots and lots of constant iterations around every single part of your business model and the things that you thought were right or not. Because there's so much uncertainty, everything needs to be tested, essentially. Yeah, let's watch this quickly.
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. Channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. Customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. Key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
So I'm going to talk a lot about the business model canvas next week. So I won't dwell on it, but even that small little intro goes back to what we were talking about just before. So on my news block example, we were saying, all right, well, what are the participants in that idea that would actually need to make it happen? And part of that is, a big part of that is the channels. So where I'm going to get my customers and how I'm going to actually take my product to those customers. One thing I will say on the business model canvas is actually a commercial product. So it's you know, they wrote this specific book, which I think is pretty good. But they sell it, and you know, it's part of their, you know, consulting and all that sort of crap. So kind of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, I guess. Some of the things you might discover on their website, but the fundamentals of it are very, very good. Yeah. So in that example that I was just talking about, with Fans Unite. So I won't go into the other boxes yet. I'll just talk about the value proposition and the customer segments. Essentially, I started that blog only to test whether I could build an audience with a key customer segment, and that was it. But there was so much other stuff that needed to be tested underneath that model, but I had to start there. I had to start somewhere. So with your ideas, essentially this should be like a living document you guys can use, and I'll upload if I haven't already, a PowerPoint. You can get it online as well, that you can edit. But essentially, it should be like a living document where you just go in and put all of your assumptions. And the whole idea of this is it's supposed to be a business plan for a startup where business plans don't work. Typical business plans don't work. It's supposed to be a list of assumptions in each one of these boxes. So, where do you assume you're going to make money in your revenue stream? What do you assume your value propositions actually are to your different customers? And what do you assume those customers, who are actually those customers, like what do you assume that they are? So it should actually be you acknowledging you don't actually know anything about how your business is going to work, but getting it down in such a way that you can then go and systematically test those things. So this will be basically this is like the core component of the first assessment. Will be an outline of this for your business idea and an MVP. All right, I'll just check the time. Steve Blank, who I have mentioned a few times, he's like, pardon me, he's like one of the best thought leaders in this space. So he's written a couple of books that talk about this in detail. One's called The Startup Owner's Manual, which is really good. Another one's called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And he's got an excellent YouTube channel. He has an online Udemy course that's for free. He's got a sensational blog. You know, he's got lots of resources and lots of content. So if you want to sort of dive into his stuff, you could be lost for weeks if you go into it. So I've pulled out a couple of different things of him talking about the lean startup for us to look at. Just excuse the fact he's super American, which isn't necessarily bad. I'll talk about customer development in a moment. So he does this long rambling sort of intro, so I'll skip past that.
What we now know is a plan is just a series of untested hypotheses. And I use this fancy word hypotheses because when I teach at Stanford, those students pay $50,000 a year and they need to tell their parents they learned something impressive at least once a week. But outside of Stanford, what a startup really is a series of untested guesses. Big idea. A startup is nothing more than a faith-based enterprise on day one. It's faith. It's truly faith. And what your job is passion and faith into facts as quickly as you can. And the organizing document I've adopted is not the business plan, it's something called the business model. And for the last 15 years, academics have argued, what the heck is a business model? You get two of us in a room and you come out with 9 definitions. But about 4 years ago, there was a guy in Switzerland, Alexander Osterwalder, who wrote a book called Business Model Generation. And if all of you don't have it, you should. It basically says, look, any company could be described as a series of 9 components. One is, what are you building? What's the product or service? He calls that the value proposition. 2 is, who are you building it for? Customer segments. You know, how are you going to get the product from you to those customer segments, channels? How are you going to create, get, keep, and grow? That is, how are you going to get customers, keep them, and grow them? We call that customer relationships. What's your revenue model? How are you going to make money? Do you need any partners? Are there any resources you need? Activities? And what are the costs? Every startup needs to answer those questions, ultimately to become a business. And the 2 most important on day 1 is, what am I making and for who? Which we call product market fit.
I was going to ask on that point, when you, does this apply to all businesses or is it just tech businesses?
You know, when I first started, I kind of thought, Daniel, this obviously just works for tech. That, you know, yeah, I've been in tech for, you know, decades and people like teacher tech. But it dawned on me only in the last couple of years that this idea of business model design and something I'll talk about called customer development actually works for everything we do that's a new venture. More importantly, it works for not just the 1% in tech, but it works for the 99% on Main Street. That is, if today you go to the SBA.gov site, you know what they'll tell you? Here's how to write a business plan. It looks like the 1960s. And think about what that means. Is that, okay, write this document, you know, show me the market size, etc. Instead of saying, hey, you want to open up a restaurant? Maybe you ought to work in one for a while. You want to pick this location? Maybe you ought to stand on that corner for, like, you know, with a clipboard. That is, there is no notion that any experiential effect is necessary. So this process works for small businesses, and it also works for large corporations. As you well know, every major corporation in the 21st century is dealing with the issues of disruption, right? Everybody. And the interesting thing is, disruption on day 1 looks like a toy. In fact, the apocryphal or semi-apocryphal story I heard when I was in Finland is the day the iPhone was announced and shipped, the Nokia board was meeting, and they had it flown by courier to the board meeting. And Nokia Engineering had already built prototypes of, at least for hardware, something that looked close to the iPhone. And in fact, they were in the board asking for a couple $100 million commitment from the board to go make one just like it. A senior board member picked up the iPhone and asked the fatal question for Nokia. You know what it was?
No.
What's their market share?
Interesting.
What was their market share on day 1?
0.
Disruption on day 1 to a large corporation always looks like a toy. And so therefore, the large corporation...
This goes on and on and on for a while. We don't have time to watch it all, but it's pretty good. Even though it's an hour. He said a few interesting things in there. One of them is about that experiential side of exploring your business model. So, you know, he gave a very simple example. Like, if you want to start a restaurant, maybe you should go and work in a restaurant for a while. You know, it's actually hilarious and somewhat scary how often people, particularly entrepreneurs, try and launch something in a segment they know nothing about, or that they've never actually experienced. So, putting together a business model around that looks something like this, or has these components, inherently in here, and he said it, the 2 most important things are, what are you building, the value proposition, and who are you selling it to? And remember how I said at the start, one of the most important things for you guys, for your ideas, is that if you are experiencing the problem, if you are close to the problem, then that's fantastic. Because if you're close to the problem and you experience it, then you're already in both of those boxes. And they're the most important ones. So if you actually have already done that thing, or you've experienced it in such a way that it actually really chafes on you, then you can run at it with insight that doesn't require you to do a whole bunch of customer development to try and really get a hold of it and really understand it. brings me to customer development. So what is customer development? Essentially, I just kind of call this customer development sort of like market research, but with a fancy name. Steve Blank talks about it in the context of lots of people, particularly in tech, and we've got to sort of be mindful that this can be skewed a bit by the technology ideas, but as he said, they do apply to everyone. It's just sort of concentrated in technology, but it's very easy to just go out and build something in the tech world. So the question, and Eric Ries always says this, is should I build this product? And getting an answer to should I build this product is about customer development, not product development. So you could go and spend, all the money that you have in your bank account to build your, maybe like a science reporting website or whatever it is, whatever your idea ends up being, all of your ideas. But unless you've actually answered the question, should this be built, then all of your money and all of your effort and all of your time is wasted. And I've experienced that with startups. You think, I've put all this effort in, I've done it with features, it's not a very pleasant experience when you work really hard. You're like, yeah, this is amazing, and you put it in front of people, and exactly as Eric Ries says, you're like, it's not that people said it was terrible, it's just people didn't use it at all, which is even worse. So the quicker you can get an answer to those questions, the more effective your time will be. And in reality, in startups, when you're actually working in a startup or in a business, capital is the most precious thing you've got, money. And the more effectively you can conserve those resources until you actually land on something that is valuable, then the more successful you'll be.
So one of the really interesting developments about this class is this whole customer development process. It says you start with your business model canvas hypothesis. And in fact, what you really do is you blow up the canvas and you actually post it to the wall. And you use yellow stickies, no pens or pencils allowed, because you are going to get most of them wrong. But you're going to make it visible, and you will actually begin to construct your hypotheses. And the next thing you'll do is look at them and go, hey, there aren't any facts in this room. Let's get out into the building and talk to customers and partners and vendors, and we'll learn how to do this with some rigor, with a process, not just randomly getting out, but actually design experiments, run tests, get data, and more importantly, get some insight. And the customer development process is kind of interesting. The customer development process is actually a 4-step process. The first step is customer discovery. This is where you construct your hypotheses and you get out of the building and start testing your assumption about whether other people have the same problem or need you think they have. And then you're going to do customer validation and actually see if your proposed solution actually matches what you think the customer problem was. And this test of between problem and solution and your features and customers is actually sometimes called product market fit. That's what you're out testing. And this is what we call the search for the business model. But now instead of randomly doing this by hiring and firing sales execs and trying to make numbers that really are just random guesses, we're actually going to have you get out as early as possible and test some of these primary assumptions. One of the interesting things on the bottom of this diagram that we'll talk about is something called the pivot. And the pivot is what will save your job. Once you find this repeatable and scalable business model, then you go into the execution phase of customer development. And that's about creating end-user demand and scale, called customer creation, and then building the organizations to actually build your company for scale by transitioning from customer development into a functional organization that's oriented for constant and rapid execution.
I think that's
scale, called customer creation.
It's quite a good
by transitioning.
There we go. It's quite a good summary. So in this class, what we're talking about is only really on the left. Is what we're actually going to be doing. So part of the assessable criteria in the assessments is actually, you can just go and do customer interviews if you, as a component of what you want to do. Because depending on the scale of your idea, it might actually be quite difficult to build a real executable product for them to use. So for example, for your idea, like the actual customer experience of that idea is pretty big and pretty expensive and pretty hard. but there are components that you can test. But really, like that, what he said before is just some of the best advice. Getting out of the building. So you look at that business plan and just acknowledge there aren't any facts in that yet for you. So when you actually look at when you actually build this, and I recommend maybe potentially sketching some of those ideas out once you can get your hands on it, and get a handle on it, even on the value proposition front. Acknowledging that there's no fact in there, and it's all assumptions, and then do what he described, which is get out of the building and go and talk to some real people about it, is so valuable. But it's actually, even then, it's not actually building out or validating your idea unless you can actually give them a product or something that they can touch and feel. So let's talk about what those things are now, which is MVPs. So, as I said before, a test of an assumption should be a product. But a product can take lots of different forms. So, as I showed you before, the MVP for Fans Unite was a blog. It was pretty average, pretty crappy. Still put it out there because it's important. If you wait to get an answer, then it's better to have the wrong news early than to keep sort of an assumption business plan and find out when you're running out of money or you're going broke or something like that. It's better to get that harsh reality served back to you as quickly as possible from a customer. And so that means you should put stuff out that, it doesn't necessarily have to look great. It just has to be a decent representation of what your business idea will actually be. So for example, this is the startup I'm running now. It's called Cognitives. It's a startup. It's a publishing technology business. There we go. Here's my ridiculous face. We relaunched our website the other day. So this product isn't ready yet, right? But it kind of looks like it is. And so we've got this little beta sign-up form just here. And that gives me a good indication of what my, what are called trial rates are going to be, which is one really important part of my financial business model. How many people are trying the product versus how many people are coming to my website. Currently it's about 2%, which is lower than I need it to be, so I need to do some work. And I know that now before I've even launched the product. And that's a really simple way you can do something like that. Spin up I call them landing pages as well. Here's another example of one that I've done for almost like a consulting business, I guess you could call it. I wanted to test if there was a market for or an interest in what's called inbound marketing for universities. It's a specific area of digital marketing. I had no idea. I didn't really know. Even though I could see other businesses trying to do a similar thing, I didn't actually really know whether it was. So I put this website out there, made a crappy little brand. I can look at it. They can see the services that I'm offering. But none of this actually exists. But the inquiries and the interest in this, and then also how much I might have to pay in terms of marketing to actually get people to come and inquire, that gives me a pretty good indication of how much is it going to, like what kind of demand out there is there for this kind of product, and how much would it cost me to land a customer. And those are really important clues to a business model. But I could do it without having to build anything, without having to start a business, without having to have a product. All of that can be done before you have anything. Here's my ridiculous head. Cool. Now, I already went through. I think next week what we might do is we'll revisit MVPs, and I'll go through some other examples of MVPs, so you can get a handle on, start getting some ideas around how you might want to test out your idea with MVPs, minimum viable products. A couple of other notes on minimum viable products. Oops. Some markets won't accept a minimum viable product that looks bad. So some will. Consumer internet products definitely will. Media, digital media, probably. You can get away with that. If you're trying to sell software to enterprise for millions of dollars, then they won't accept a crappy looking MVP. If you're trying to get certain customer segments to engage with something, then it has to look a certain way. Usually might take a bit more energy, a bit more investment. But some categories will be very, so that's just something to be mindful of. And as one thing that actually comes up with MVPs is people say, well, what about all the people who are going to be disappointed in the fact that they can't buy the thing that I'm putting out there now? If you have that problem, then you're the luckiest person to ever build an MVP. Because 99 times out of 100, that won't happen. And you'll have learnt something very valuable before you spend a lot of money trying to do it. So, and you can always apologize and say, hey, it's coming soon. Like even to the point where we've had advice from mentors saying, well, even if you do get people signing up now, just say it's available now, but say that they, if it's going to be available in, say, 45 days, then just give them a bunch of work to do for that period of time to give you a chance to finish it. By the time that they're ready, you'll be ready. So there's lots of different things that you can do in that regard. Cool. So the last thing I might go through, and then we can jump into your ideas, is this feedback loop, the build, measure, learn feedback loop. Now, this infographic, it applies to every business idea. It's not just digital, but in this example, he uses lots of digital related concepts in this infographic. The idea, so say you're only thinking about your value hypothesis right now. The idea would be that you basically put your idea in there, try and build something and get it into people's hands, and measure using some tools that I'll go through in week 5, so tools for entrepreneurial journalists. Try and measure the performance of that product, whatever it is. And then you take that learning and put it back into the product and repeat the cycle. But as I said, that might be just for your value hypothesis, which is actually your product. But then you might say, right, well, now we think we've got something that's pretty valuable, but I have no idea what the revenue model will be underneath that. So then you take this concept, this feedback loop concept, and apply it to your revenue streams. What can we test in the context of revenue? How can we make money off this? And then you go through the same process. Even to the point where you might say, look, like our key partners or our resources. So something that you might think is kind of back office. So for your idea, it's actually schools. You need the schools to be your partners. Otherwise, your business model doesn't work, or your idea doesn't work. Are there interesting and different ways you can innovate in that space to make your business model more efficient? You can use the same process. So it doesn't have to just be about product or the thing that you're selling or the customer segments that you're going after. It could be every aspect of your business. As he said, the goal is to make that process as quick as possible. So to go through this thing as quick as possible. In non-digital businesses, that probably means a series of weeks. So 2 to 3 weeks, perhaps, for all of your tests that you're running. In a digital business, they run really fast. So because it's very easy to push a new product out to your market. So for example, if you apply this to your content strategy, how could you deploy content in the context of an experiment like this to try and learn about, the kinds of content that your audience is responding to, the formats it needs to be in to be the most compelling for people to read it, the format or the form it needs to be in for people to share it and increase your distribution. All of that, your content strategy can be put through this process as well. We did a bit of that when I was at Fans Unite, so saying, all right, what are the types of articles that drive return visitors to your site, so loyalty, and what are the types of articles and the types of content that drive shareability and reach. And so we did some experiments on both of those things, and then we basically changed the incentive model for our bloggers to focus on the ones who were really good at making shareable content that just went nuts on social media. We gave them a remuneration model specifically around that to try and do that. And then the ones who were really good at driving loyalty, so people coming back, we specifically gave them a remuneration model to do that. And that way we were trying to get both of the things that I was talking about in that at the start. User engagement and also audience. And we did it through this context. I'll let you go through those details if you like. That's just another sort of infographic on the topic. I'll chuck these up. There's a range of different other things you could check out. The first one is sort of like the primer article from the Harvard Business Review, written by Steve Blank. Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything. It's a good summary. And then Steve Blank's website is also really good, and the Business Model Canvas. And then that last point is actually a book, Randy Komisar's Getting to Plan B. I'll talk a little bit more about that next week when we start talking more about pivots and when to pivot, how do you know when to pivot and what a pivot is and that sort of thing. Cool. Any questions? All those questions flying out of you guys. You're always so talkative as well. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I really love this idea, the Lean Startup idea, because like that infographic said at the start, and you meet a lot of people when you're working in startups who kind of take that view, that it's like, I'm just this, I've got the Midas touch kind of thing on startups, and what I know is what's going to work, and that's total bullshit. Because the inherent nature of doing something new is that you don't know. That's the whole idea. So you need a process that actually can take you through validating and finding out what you do and don't know, what's right and what's not right, what's wrong. So that's why I really like that, because it kind of takes the mystique out of it. This whole like startup genre nonsense around, these like geniuses sitting in their rooms, coming up with these ideas that change the world. When actually, if you look at it, it's a systematic process that you can go through, and it's a business process, essentially. I said I wasn't going to swear as much in this lecture, but I think I have. Alright, cool. I might just stop this recording.